The 2026 Senate elections are coming up fast. Republicans are looking to defend their 53-seat majority. In today's video, we're going to be filling out the map based on a combination of the latest polls and forecasts in every single race. There are 35 seats up for election. We'll begin by filling in the solid states for both parties where we do not yet have any polling data available. Starting with the Republicans, we have Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. South Dakota, Kansas, and Oklahoma. Then in the South, there's Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And finally, in the Midwest, we have Kentucky and West Virginia. Republicans are running for re-election in each of these states, except for Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell is retiring, and Alabama, where Tommy Tuberville is running for governor. But that won't matter, as Kentucky and Alabama are two of the reddest states in the nation. Now, as for the Democrats, they'll safely hold their seats in Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, and Illinois. Then up in the Northeast, Delaware, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. Together, those 8 states raise the Democratic seat count to 42, though they trail Republicans, who are now projected to reach 46 seats, with 15 of their own safe states added to their column as well. That leaves just 12 competitive races, a historically low number of seats in which both parties have at least some chance at winning. And that reality puts Republicans in a commanding position. In fact, according to 538, this is the fewest vulnerable seats any president's party has had to defend in a recent midterm. The math is actually pretty simple. Republicans can hold their Senate majority just by defending 3 of the 7 remaining seats in states Donald Trump carried in 2024. Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska, Texas, and Alaska. And that's before even factoring in pickup opportunities in states like Michigan and potentially even New Hampshire. For Democrats, meanwhile, let's assume for the sake of argument they managed to hold all 4 of their remaining seats in states Kamala Harris won: Minnesota, Michigan, Virginia, and New Hampshire. Even then, they'd still need to retain their seat in Georgia and flip 4 of the 7 remaining Republican-held seats to get to 51. And here's where the math gets even more daunting of those 7 Republican-held seats. Take a look at Trump's 2024 margin. The clearest Democratic pickup opportunity is in Maine, which Harris carried by nearly 7 points, followed by North Carolina, where Trump's margin was just 3. But the other 5, Ohio, Nebraska, Alaska, Iowa, and Texas, were all carried by Trump by double-digit margins. So even in a strong blue wave year, the math for a Democratic Senate majority in 2026 probably isn't there. All right, now with that frame in place, let's dive into these 12 competitive races, going in order of how competitive I believe they really are. So starting in Alaska, a fundamentally strong Republican state. All 3 major forecasters, Inside Elections, Cook, and Sabato currently rate this race as solidly Republican. That's largely due to Alaska's deep red partisan lean. The state hasn't elected a Democrat to federal office since 2008, and Donald Trump carried the last frontier by 13 points in the 2024 presidential election. Adding to the GOP's advantage, former Congresswoman Mary Peltola, widely considered the Democrats' best potential challenger, is reportedly more likely to run for governor rather than take on incumbent Senator Dan Sullivan. That's a significant development, especially considering Peltola actually led Sullivan by 3 points in the only poll conducted here so far. But until her plans are official, and given Alaska's unique ranked choice voting system, which always introduces some added uncertainty, we'll hold this race in the likely Republican column for now. If Peltola officially bows out, this one would instantly shift to safe. On a similar note to Alaska, Nebraska is another fundamentally strong Republican state. Donald Trump carried the Cornhusker state by more than 20 points last November. Every major forecaster has Pete Ricketts heavily favored for re-election, but the big news this week is that Dan Osborne has launched another independent bid for Senate. You might remember Osborne from last cycle when he came within 7 points of unseating longtime Senator Deb Fischer. He proved to be a formidable fundraiser, effectively branding himself as not a Trump Republican, but also not a Democrat, allowing him to appeal to independents, moderate Republicans, and Democrats alike. Now looking ahead to 2026, the only poll thus far surveyed by Change Research, released in early April, shows a surprisingly tight race. Incumbent Republican Pete Ricketts leads independent Dan Osborne by just 1 point, 46% to 45%. Ricketts isn't a popular candidate, even within his own party, so if Osborne decides to run again, we could be looking at a genuinely competitive race, especially with 2026 shaping up to be a more favorable cycle for Democrats than 2024. Nebraska goes down as likely Republican on our map. Also, in the likely Republican column is Iowa, where the race just became a lot more interesting. Republican Senator Joni Ernst drew a whole lot of negative attention during a town hall earlier this month, prompting several Democrats to jump into the race, seeing an opening even in a state that's shifted sharply to the right over the past decade. Trump carried Iowa by 13 points in 2024. The largest margin for either party since Nixon's 49-state landslide in 1972. But Ernst's comments, combined with the entries of J.D. Scholten and State Senator Zach Walz, have led both the Cook Political Report and Sabato's Crystal Ball to move the race into the likely Republican column. The only poll so far, from Public Policy polling in early June, shows Ernst leading a generic Democrat by just 2 points. I'm inclined to follow the forecaster's lead, placing Iowa alongside Alaska and Nebraska in that same likely Republican tier. Another race that I think fits into this tier of very likely to be held by one party is Virginia, but this time for Democrats. Incumbent Mark Warner has not said whether he will run for election to a 4th term, but is signaling that he will. In that case, the only factor that could make this race competitive is if outgoing Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin throws his hat into the ring. Warner is a strong incumbent with a substantial fundraising total, and with Youngkin's intentions still unclear, all 4 forecasters have it down as safe Democrats. The only poll here was surveyed by VCU, which shows Warner leading Youngkin by 8 percentage points back in mid-January. Our next state is Texas, which saw the 6th largest pro-Trump swing between 2020 and 2024, as he expanded his margin from 5.5 points all the way up to 14. That shift effectively dashed any hopes Democrats had of unseating 4-term Republican Senator John Cornyn in 2026, or at least that was the case, until Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton launched a primary challenge against Cornyn, setting the stage for a showdown between the GOP establishment and its hardline conservative base. Cornyn and Paxton have been at odds for years. Paxton has repeatedly criticized Cornyn for being insufficiently conservative, while Cornyn has pointed to Paxton's numerous legal troubles, including his 2023 impeachment by the Republican-controlled Texas House. So far, neither Donald Trump nor Senator Ted Cruz has endorsed a candidate, but Trump's endorsement is widely viewed as critical in determining the outcome of the primary. And right now, Paxton is leading. He's been ahead in every single primary poll conducted so far, and by double-digit margins in 11 of the 13. That being said, it's important to keep in mind that Texas holds runoff primary elections if no candidate receives more than 50% of the vote, which we've seen happen in 3 of the last 5 surveys. It's also worth noting that Cornyn has a substantial war chest at his disposal, along with several endorsements from prominent U.S. senators, factors that have helped boost his odds in the prediction markets. He now has a 44% chance of winning the nomination, according to Kalshi, his highest mark since April. If he survives the primary, Cornyn would likely win re-election comfortably, and Texas would remain in the safe Republican column. But if Paxton secures the nomination, the general election outlook will tighten significantly, especially with Colin Allred officially jumping into the race. Allred's candidacy is particularly notable given his strong performance in 2024 when he outpaced Kamala Harris in Texas by 5 points and came within 9 points of unseating Ted Cruz. The latest poll from YouGov and Texas Southern University shows Cornyn leading Allred by 4 points among 1,200 registered voters, while Paxton leads Allred by just 2. That same pattern holds for every other hypothetical Democratic opponent as well. For now, Texas remains in the likely Republican column, but if Paxton becomes the nominee, don't be surprised if I shift my rating to lean Republican. The final likely state on my map is Ohio, where we're looking at a special election to fill the remainder of the Senate term vacated by Vance. Republican Governor Mike DeWine appointed Lieutenant Governor John Husted to the seat, making him the unelected incumbent heading into 2026. Husted is a seasoned statewide office holder with a strong political network, and unless Democrats field a top-tier candidate, he's clearly the favorite. And that's really what this race hinges on, whether former Senator Sherrod Brown or former Congressman Tim Ryan decides to run. Brown is reportedly weighing a bid, either for this Senate seat or for governor, and he'd be the Democrats' best shot at flipping it. Even then, he'd likely still enter the race as an underdog. In surveys conducted by Bowling Green State University and YouGov, Husted leads Brown by margins of 3 and 6 points, respectively, and leads Ryan by 6 and 7. That's enough for 2 of the 3 most reputable election forecasters to rate this race as likely Republican, while Inside Elections has it down as safe. I'd agree with that safe rating if Brown stays out of the race, but as long as there's a chance he jumps in, Ohio remains in the likely Republican column, with the potential to shift toward lean if the matchup materializes. The 6 states that remain on the board are all genuinely competitive. If a likely rating suggests one party holds a clear edge, but an upset remains possible, then a lean rating means one party has only a slight advantage, and the race is very much in play. The first state in that category is Minnesota. Democratic Senator Tina Smith is retiring, setting up the first open Senate contest in Minnesota since 2006. While Republicans haven't won a federal election here since 2002, Minnesota remains consistently competitive, with most races decided by single-digit margins. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan currently holds the early edge in the Democratic primary, with Congresswoman Angie Craig seen as the next most likely contender. On the Republican side, the most prominent name in the race so far is former NBA player Royce White, but he lost to Amy Klobuchar by 16 points in 2024. Don't read too much into the battleground label used by Inside Elections. It's currently the only rating they're using this cycle outside of safe. The lean Democratic ratings from the other 3 major forecasters offer a more realistic read on the race. Unless Republicans can recruit a significantly stronger candidate, Flanagan, or whoever ultimately wins the Democratic nomination, should be favored to hold this seat. Similar circumstances up in New Hampshire. Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen is retiring, and Congressman Chris Pappas is the first to enter the race to succeed her. He's likely to remain the most prominent Democrat in the field. Unfortunately for Republicans, former Governor Chris Sununu has decided not to run. He would have been the party's strongest contender by far. Instead, it looks like former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown will likely win the Republican nomination. He's a strong candidate in his own right and should give Pappas a real challenge, but in the absence of any polling, will defer to the experts' lean Democrat rating. And given that Republicans haven't won a federal race here in over 15 years, that's what we'll go with on our map. Now only 4 states remain, and there's not much separating them from each other. They could all easily go either way, so let's just stick in New England here with Maine first, where incumbent Republican Susan Collins continues to be a political unicorn. Back in 2020, nearly every poll and analyst predicted her defeat, yet she beat Democrat Sarah Gideon by 8 points, even as Joe Biden carried Maine by 9. To this day, she remains the only Republican to win a Senate race in a state simultaneously carried by a Democratic presidential nominee since 2004. Looking ahead to 2026, Maine is the only Republican-held seat in a state that Kamala Harris won, and it's widely considered Democrats' top pickup opportunity. Their best possible challenger would have been Congressman Jared Golden, but he has declined. If Golden did run, Democrats would probably have been favorites, but without him, their most established option is outgoing Governor Janet Mills, who doesn't necessarily boast awe-inspiring approval numbers. In the absence of polling again, the experts generally lean in favor of Collins, and I agree. It's essentially a coin flip, but given Collins's track record, she remains the narrow favorite, even though on fundamentals alone, the state leans more Democratic than New Hampshire. Now over to Michigan, where we have yet another open race following the retirement of Democrat Gary Peters. This one poses even more of a challenge for Democrats than Minnesota or New Hampshire, after Trump carried Michigan this past November by about 1 point. Both parties have had success in Michigan recently, but Democrats have been stronger outside of presidential races. They currently hold both U.S. Senate seats, all statewide executive offices, and control the state Senate. Republicans haven't won a Senate race here since 1994, but this is probably their best opportunity since then. On the Democratic side, with both Pete Buttigieg and outgoing Governor Gretchen Whitmer declining to run, the party lacks a clear top-tier name. Congresswoman Haley Stevens is currently the frontrunner among declared candidates, with State Senator Mallory McMorrow close behind. Stevens has slightly outperformed fundamentals in her last 3 House races by about 1 or 2 points, but nothing especially notable. On the Republican side, former Congressman Mike Rogers is expected to be the nominee. He ran a strong campaign in 2024, coming within 0.3 of a point of defeating Alyssa Slotkin in last year's open seat battle. With that experience, plus the fundraising apparatus and name recognition that come with it, Rogers will have a very good shot at flipping this seat. That being said, we do have some polling assessing the potential race between Stevens and Rogers, with Stevens leading Rogers in each of the last 4 surveys, albeit by margins very much within the margin of error. The 3 major forecasters have this contest down as a toss-up, but considering this is a prediction channel and simply placing the race in the toss-up column may be seen as a cop-out, I'll give Democrats the slightest edge here as the incumbent party. That leaves North Carolina and Georgia, the 2 most high-profile Senate races to watch this cycle. In North Carolina, Republican Senator Thom Tillis has announced he won't seek a 3rd term. His departure wasn't entirely unexpected. Tillis had long faced criticism from the right, censured by the state GOP back in 2023 for his bipartisan support on immigration, gun control, and same-sex marriage. But what seems to have sealed it was his recent vote against President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill that effectively ended his already shaky standing within the MAGA wing of the party. Now, with Tillis out, the Republican primary field is wide open. Early reporting suggests that former RNC co-chair and Trump's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, is seriously considering a run, and she's widely seen as having the right of first refusal. Her nomination, however, would be a disaster for Republicans. That's not hyperbole. It's an objective political reality, especially with former Governor Roy Cooper increasingly likely to enter the race on the Democratic side. Cooper would immediately become the strongest non-incumbent candidate in the country. He left office with high approval ratings, near universal name recognition across the state, and a powerful fundraising network already in place. Cooper would have at least had a 50-50 shot even against an incumbent like Tillis, but in an open seat race, he starts out as the clear favorite, particularly if Lara Trump is the nominee, in which case this race could shift as far left as lean Democrats. For now, I'm placing it in the tilt Democrat column, pending the outcome of the Republican primary. Finally, in Georgia, outgoing Governor Brian Kemp's decision not to run for Senate was, at the time, the worst news Republicans received all cycle. Kemp, much like Roy Cooper in North Carolina, is a popular, battle-tested leader in a politically competitive state. He would have been the strongest possible Republican to challenge Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff, and might even have been favored to flip the seat, despite Ossoff's considerable strengths as a candidate. Ossoff made history in 2020 by defeating incumbent David Perdue in a high-stakes runoff, and has since built a formidable political brand and fundraising machine. Without Kemp, Republicans lack a clear top-tier alternative. Congressman Buddy Carter is the most prominent name to enter the race so far, with another potential contender in Congressman Mike Collins reportedly inching toward a bid, but neither candidate is particularly well-positioned to compete at the scale this race demands. It's also important to note that while much of the country swung sharply to the right between 2020 and 2024, Georgia and North Carolina did not. Both states are experiencing gradual demographic shifts that continue to benefit Democrats, expanding, diversifying metro areas, and a steady influx of college-educated transplants from traditionally blue regions in the Northeast and West. Put it all together, and Jon Ossoff now holds a clear edge in what was once shaping up to be the GOP's best flip opportunity of the cycle. So with all that said, we land at a projected 52 to 48 Republican majority, with Democrats gaining 2 seats. While their path to a majority remains narrow, it still exists. Most likely it would require flipping Maine, currently rated as tilt Republican, and then taking 2 of the following likely Republican seats: Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska, and/or Texas. That's just my current read based on where the national environment and candidate dynamics stand today, but of course, it's still early. The map can and will shift. Feel free to share your thoughts on the map in the comments below and let me know what topics or races you'd like me to cover next. That's it for today's video. Huge thanks to my channel members, all listed in the description. Don't forget to hit subscribe and drop a like if you enjoyed the content. Check out more videos here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.